So here we go. So we're now in chapter 7 of Ayin Beis, page 11. So after describing the relationship of the containers to the energy, how the containers affect the or, the light, and that they're tailored for each other, which explains that the kalim are subjugated. They become like servants, tools, instruments to the artist's instruments. Well, the kalim are like the paint, actually, and the instruments to the energy that's invested by the artist in creation. So therefore, through this combination, this integration, this fusion of container, energy and container, allows for the revelation to be one that can manifest in the lower worlds. If, for example, the energy and the container did not fit each other, you wouldn't have a painting and no one would be able to look at this painting. So think of the recipients being the lower worlds who need a balanced container and energy in the world of Atzilus to allow us to have a painting, allow us to appreciate it, and allow it to bring the knowledge and the awareness and revelation of the divine to the next level. Should there have been no instruments, there'd be no painting. Should the instruments have not been commensurate and proportionate to the energy, there would also be no painting. Now we have the picture is complete. And as we said, this will manifest through Chachma, specifically. And because Atzilus, primarily the root, the source comes through Chachma. Everything comes through Chachma. And that allows the bittul, the selflessness, the suspension of self, to manifest also in the lower worlds. So now he continues in chapter 7. And behold, we learned earlier, it was discussed earlier, b'moshel, in the analogy. Remember, there was first the analogy where we spoke about this whole idea as it is in the world. In Atzilus, he spoke about it how it is in the human being, the faculties and the lights, the faculties and the containers and the organs. So we explained earlier in the moshel, in the metaphor, the mashakechis mislapshim behevarim, that when the faculties manifest and dress up in the organs, which are not relatively, they're not relative to each other. The faculties and the organs are very far apart. So the fact that these faculties manifest in the organs that are so distant from them, the reason for that is that's because the faculties are fundamentally internal forces. They're not a makiv, they're not transcendental energies. But they are, even before they enter the container, they are fundamentally, their personality is such that they're primis. They're internalized, they're integrated type of faculties. Which means that they are faculties of the spirit, of the soul, and not the light, the energy of the essence of the soul. They become concentrated and diminished in order to be pnimi. In order to be an pnimi. And pnimi means in order to become this internalized light. So there's several. So in other words, its personality is such that lends itself to manifest inside containers. So in other words, what he's adding here, he's going into now, is another aspect of this. It's not just that the containers affect the energy, but the energy itself, even prior to entering the containers, has that type of personalization, that type of uniqueness to it, that type of internalized individuality that lends itself to fit into those containers. Now he's going to say, so how do we understand this above? In other words, let me be more specific. You see, the key here is that understanding and explanation of the concept of the interface between the divine and the human, between the immortal and the mortal, between the infinite and the finite. To really create a proper interface, we really need these two worlds to meet in the fullest possible fashion. So we have here the artist, using the metaphor I've been using, the painter, the artist. We have here his instruments, his paint, his tools. And we have the painting. And we have the paint. So the painter himself, the artist himself, should he not have these instruments, we would never be able to connect to his art, because he wouldn't have created it. It would be something in the conceptual plane, in his mind, an abstract state. The fact that he takes his energy and uses these instruments and the paint to create on the canvas an actual image, that is the interface, those tools, those instruments. But what about the energy itself? The energy that he invests when he uses those tools. Is the energy just passing through, so to speak, those instruments? Or do they themselves also have a certain shape and form? I'll just give you an example. For example, if you take sunlight is equalizes everything. If you use shades to look at sunlight, or use a shade, if you use a green shade, it'll shine green. Use a yellow shade, it'll be yellow. It'll be a red shade, a blue shade. That doesn't change the sunlight. It's just that we're creating shades that allow the sun to reflect in different colors. But it's not like the sun has red, yellow, green, even though in truth the spectrum of light does have them all. Okay, but the sun, as we see it, is white light. Or think of it this way.
Give me 1 second.
So think of it this way. You have a white light projecting from a projector, film projector. So before there's any film put before that white light is just white light. When you put the film there, the light doesn't change. The light remains white light. What's happening is the film is now projecting onto the wall or onto the screen an image, because the light is shining through that film. The film is shaping the light, but the light hasn't changed, which really means that the light remains still fundamentally indivisible. What he's going to say here, that's not the case. We want to have that even the divine light has within it elements that fit and are tailored to the particular shapes and colors that it will ultimately create. You see that?
Yep.
So brings us one step closer to the painter. That brings us one step closer to God. Because if you say God is like the white light, and he just used the containers of Atzilus to create, then all we can really know of him is what the containers tell us. But the light itself remains beyond us. What he wants to say is that the containers help us understand the light too. And that helps us connect to the divine. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
So it's not just like water in different colored glasses. The water itself has different colors. The light itself has different colors. Clear?
Yep, let me get this. So there's a level between the divine pure light. There's a step down where that light has different properties, different particularities.
Yeah.
Which always are there.
Like when we say the faculties, then when we said, if you remember, that even though the power of vision is so far apart from the eye,
right.
If you put the power of vision here and the eye here near each other, you wouldn't even know. This is energy, this is container.
Right.
But we know it's not, the power of vision is different than the power of hearing. So even the power, the energy of it is different.
Got you. That's good.
So it's not right. So it's not just that the eye. It's not like one energy is flowing into the body and the eye is blue colors, a blue colored glass, and the ears are red colored glass, and the nose is an orange colored glass. But the light, the energy itself also has a personality, has features that remain somewhat abstract and remain amorphous. But they will ultimately, when they go into the eye, fit into the eye, and the vision of sight would not fit into the ear because it's not customized for it. So it's not. So it's not just. So two things are happening here. Not only is the container custom to the energy is customized to the container. You get that?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it would be something like this. You can be a teacher that teaches a group of 5 people and says one thing, and each one takes his way, or he can actually address each one of the 5 and tailor his words to each of them.
That's good.
Yeah. So now he's going to explain how this is above, because he explained it before in the analogy. Now he's going to explain to how it is above. You mean in the spiritual worlds. Ready?
Okay.
Ayin hu, the Inyan is this meaning. The subject matter here is the Yudua. It's known that Atzilus Gilia Helam Ein Sof HaMaitza. It's known that Atzilus, remember Atzilus is that intermediary, the interface, is Gilia Helam. It's only the revealing of something concealed from the divine infinite light of the source. This is the Inyan, this is what Atzilus is. Atzilus, the word comes from a verse in the chapter Ba'aleischa, in the book of Numbers, where it says, V'atzalti min haruach, I have imparted from your spirit. V'atzalti min haruach asher alecha, I have imparted from the spirit that is upon you, which is God speaking to Moses, in order to take part of that spirit and transmit it to the Skenim, to the sages of the time. It's only the imparting, it's a part of the original that is not something new. There's no new innovation here. No innovation here. Why? Because there could be something that is a new innovation. Here he wants to say Atzilus is a piece of that which was above it. And it's just revealing that which was already there. Because this is vital, because as I said, you want to have that the energy is going to reflect the divine, and you want that energy should have in it particles or personality that fits the containers that it will go into. So he's saying Atzilus is Gilia Hel. What is it discussing there? Moses is telling God that I don't have the ability to provide meat. And other certain needs for the Jewish people. So God says, I will impart from you, I will take from you. Part of the spirit that I have, the divine spirit with you, and impart it to the sages. So he's saying, when he did that, it's part of Moses' original spirit. It's not something new. When God imparted it, took Atzilus Ruchi, separated from Moses, the spirit, and placed it onto the sages, or the elders, is actually Skenim, the elders. It's not a different entity. It's not a different entity. The transmission because it still remains that Moses remains the leader. It's not like he delegated it to new leaders. Moses still remains the leader of the generation. The only thing is he delegated part of his wisdom, part of his spirit, to the elders of his generation. So it remains, because that transmission still has to be through Moses. That which was imparted unto the elders is the spirit of Mamish. It's literally the spirit of Moses. Before it was included within Moses. And then it was transmitted from the concealed state to a revealed state. In other words, you could have two types of appointments. You can have a leader appointing another leader. And you go lead, let's say, I'm running this country, you go and become the king of another country. So he gives him wisdom and he gives him power and so on. But once he's a ruler of that second country, the original ruler is no longer ruler. Here, Moses was delegating, and God was delegating part of Moses' spirit and Moses' wisdom onto sages to help him, elders, to help him lead the people. So they remain ministers of his leadership, not new leaders. So basically, all they're really doing is taking that which Moses had and revealing it and bringing it down to the next level. So therefore, just as it is in the way it's originally explained in that chapter about the numbers, he now goes on and says, "Who inyan Atzilus lamayla." The same thing is with Atzilus, the spiritual world of Atzilus. It's not a new innovation. It's not a new thing. It's not a creation. Like the world of Bria, which is a creation from ex nihilo, from nothing. Atzilus is not Bria. Atzilus is not a creation. Atzilus is a revelation. It's revealing something that was there before. And that's why Atzilus, that's what it means, that Atzilus is literally divine. It's divinity, it's godliness. What does that mean when you say something is godly? It means the alakus, the divinity, the spirituality, the godliness of the light, the energy of Atzilus, is an extension of the essence of the divine, of God. As is explained elsewhere. Obviously, this is not the essence of God himself. But it's only a reflection of that spreads from him, that extends from him, expresses him. But on the other hand, it's not something new. So think of it like sunlight. The light of the sun is not the sun, but it's nothing outside of the sun. It's a reflection of the sun. It's nothing new. The light of the sun was inside the sun too beforehand. It's only a revelation of that which it has within us. Or if any of us, you use your faculties, so you're revealing something that's there already. It's not a new thing. If you build a house, it's a new thing. But if you open your eyes and look at something, that's not new. It's just an extension of what you have within you, and it's coming now from potential to actual. Okay?
Yeah. Except when you build a house, it still comes from the idea of a house.
Yeah, it's just an example. But I mean to say, the house is an entity you have to build. It's not you need other tools and stuff like that. It's not just opening your eyes and just doing something you're capable of doing.
So that part of Numbers, God is not saying to Moses, I'm imparting to you some of the spirit from on high. He's saying, I'm taking what you already have and imparting that to the elders,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So he's not adding more to Moses.
No. Okay.
How do you say that Beria is new? Doesn't that derive then that whole world from Atzilus?
It's new in the sense that it's not just a reflection of that which came before. It needs some a new personality. In other words, it's not just the divine expressing itself. It's divine choosing to create something that is not similar to the original divine. It would be like sunlight suddenly had the power to create a table. Sunlight can warm. It can make things grow. It brings us light, but it doesn't build tables. Follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So God obviously has the power to build a table, but the energy is an extension of the divine in that sense. The creation of something new needs something that is more than just a regular expression of his personality. In other words, there's two ways that the divine manifests. One in an extension of himself, and one in a innovation. Okay? So, but nevertheless, even though Atzilus is only Gilead Helen. It only reveals that which is concealed. And it's an extension and expression of the original spirit, of course in a diminished way. Nevertheless, even Atzilus is also infinitely distant from Atzmus, from the essence. And this is also understood from a Mashukosov where it says, which says, there's a verse that says, wisdom, from whence does it come? From where does it come? So he's going to explain now that the word ma'ayin timatzah, literally the Hebrew v'chachma ma'ayin timatzah, literally means from where do you come? That chachma comes from a where, from a place that is beyond it completely. Because the word is ayin. Ayin means nothingness. So chachma, from where do you come, is like saying, when you say where do you come, it's like a surprising question. He's coming from a place you can't, like where does an idea come from? So it's from a very distant place. Like certain things, if I pour you a cup of water from a pitcher, you know where it came from. You see the pitcher, and it brought you water. But when you say, where did it come from? Where did that fall into my head from? You're reflecting something that is beyond. So that's what he's going to explain now. So even though on one hand it's imparting, it's nothing new, at the same time it's infinitely distant from the essence. Chachma is yesh, is b'chinas yesh. It's an entity. When you say chachma, wisdom, it has substance. It's a yesh, it's a personality, it exists. Where does it come from, however? It comes from ayin the keser. It comes from the ayin, from the nothingness, from the state of the vol and the null and void of keter, of the crown. And it comes b'chinas yesh ma'ayin in a form of renewed, a new entity. Yesh, a yesh, an entity from nothing. Like it says elsewhere. And this also explains the word timotze. You don't just say chachma comes from, where does it come from? The word timotze means like it's found. When you say the word in Hebrew, it's like chachma, the literal interpretation would then be chachma, wisdom, from whence were you found? Not just from whence do you come, from whence do you exist? Whence were you found? Because when you say something is found, it implies like it has. You don't know where it's. Where you lose something in the street. You say where was this found? You're referring to something that doesn't have a that its source is mysterious, basically. Okay. Yeah. Like a lost object that you don't know where it came from. The same thing, wisdom does not know where it came from. So when you're standing in the shower or wherever and you conceive of an idea, you don't know where it came from. Where did the idea come from? Ideas, and they don't come from the shower head. We know that. Right? Or do they? So basically, Chachma, wisdom, says even though he's saying Atzilus and wisdom are imparting nothing new, but at the same time, wherever they come from, they're also equal distance from there. So you see here how it goes both sides?
Yep.
So they're not a new entity, but they're also completely distant from where they do come from. So Chochma doesn't know its source, and it's like a lost object. Doesn't know where it came from, like a yesh, like a matter, a piece of matter that doesn't know and doesn't appreciate and understand the source that created it. I see there's a footnote in the back which I'm going to look at. Let's look at this footnote, page 11. So let's read the parentheses in the footnote. He says, he asks a question in the footnotes. According to this, it's not understood how wisdom is called truth. Like he says in Tanya, chapter 35, in the Haggah, that he and no one else. That means that in Chachma, wisdom is known and is felt the essence of the divine. She's saying, if he doesn't know where he's coming from, so how do we say that Chachma is truth and does have a sense of its source? So this he asks, but later in the Hemshech, in this series, he will answer this question. Because he's going to explain that Chachma really has both elements. It has a sense of distance from its source, but it also relates to its source and has elements that reminds itself of its source. But right now he just poses this in a type of question right here in the footnote. There's a footnote where the Rebbe Rashab wrote that this should not be copied when it's published. So it was a footnote really for himself. But nevertheless, they published it in the back. You just tell us what it says. Okay. And Teira which is the book of discourses from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. In the Mimer, in the discourse that's called Pasach Eliyahu, that Elijah, opened up. It's a very fundamental discourse that we actually connected to last week's Parsha Vayera, the Parsha we read yesterday, which is, by the way, the Parsha of the Rebbe Rashab's birthday, which is this Thursday, the 20th of Cheshvan. So in that Pasach Eliyahu, Kosov, he writes the following. Listen to this. More than the distance between Bria and Atzilus is the distance between Atzilus compared to the divine, infinite divine light, which is like a fascinating twist. Till here we were trying to say that Atzilus is, in a sense, close to. It's only imparting, nothing new. It's not a new creation like Bria. So you'd think that Bria and Atzilus are closer. I'm sorry, pardon. You'd think that Bria is more distant from Atzilus than Atzilus is from its source, because Atzilus from its source is just imparting. Bria is a new entity. Put it this way. You think that the painting, compared to the painter, is more distant than the painter compared to the essence of the painting. Right? Yeah, because this is just an extension of his energy. The painting, the painting is an outside creation. So before the painter actually painted, he was part of him was also the ability to paint. So you think his ability to paint and his essence are closer than the painting that he creates later. And then he says no. He says opposite. The painting is as distant as the painting is from the painter is even more distant from the essence of the painter. So Atzilus is even more distant from the place it's imparted from. That's not a new creation, than the creation of Bria is from Atzilus, even though Bria is a new creation. You understand this?
Yes, I do.
So this is a fascinating twist. You get it?
I do.
Yeah. So Atzilus is going to end up having two opposites. On one hand, it's only an extension of the divine. On the other hand, it's absolutely infinitely distant from that divine. And this is what we say in the prayer. We say this in the Shabbos prayer. This is what we say. There's nothing that you're infinitely distant in this world. There's nothing that comes close to you. That means that we, the creatures, the people that live in this material world, ein lanu lemer. Hold on, let me just see this. We cannot say that just like this material world is kaim kol neged elam elyon, that this material world is like nothingness, completely null, compared to the higher worlds. That we can just like that. In other words, you could think that we could say that just like our world is like nothing and completely null compared to the highest worlds of them all, which is very spiritual, which would mean akavana elam atzilus shu elam elyon, which is referring to Atzilus, which is the higher world, because the elam is biyah, the world of biyah nikra elam taktenim. The worlds of biyah, bri yitzir asir, are called the lower worlds. Ukidu b'rabbeinu nishpresein hayemer al Atzilus elyon. As it's known that the Alter Rebbe would say, on Atzilus he would call elyon, Ebershter. When you say something is above, he was referring to Atzilus. I'll explain in a moment.
Elyon means above.
Above. Kena elam elyon hazeh hu kolo neged ein sof baruch hu. So the same thing, this elam elyon, this Atzilus, is nothing compared to the divine, infinite divine light.
Yeah.
He's explaining an expression. We say in the davening, we say ein arech lecha ba'elam hazeh. That nothing, ein arech lecha, that mit elam hazeh, ein arech lecha ba'elam hazeh means that there's nothing that is proportionate to you in this world. So he's explaining what that means. That we cannot say in this world that just as this world is null compared to Atzilus, so Atzilus is null compared to Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Ela ein arech lecha klal lidmes bitl zeh lebitl zeh. Ein arech lecha means be'elam hazeh that there's no way that you can't compare these two types of nullification, these two types of distances. So we in this world cannot say, we know that we are completely null compared to Atzilus, and that's how Atzilus is compared to God. No, that's more distant than we are from Atzilus. Which means you cannot compare the lack of value, the valuelessness, the valuelessness, the Atzilus l'gabe Ein Sof Baruch Hu lehedet tfisas makom divyala b'Atzilus. You can't compare the lack of value, the valuelessness, the meaninglessness of Atzilus compared to the infinite divine light, to the meaninglessness of Biyah compared to Atzilus. I'll explain this in a moment. Let me just read it. Because the bittul, the nullification of the higher world, compared to God, is because it's only a creation, and it's completely different from Hashem, from God, and God creates it every moment, and without God's energy flowing, it would be nothing. That's why Atzilus is completely bottled, completely subjugated, completely nullified to the divine, because it comes from it, and it would be nothing without it. But the bittul of Elam Hazeh, the nullification of this material world, our world, compared to Atzilus, to the higher world, it's not only because it is more chashuv, it is more someone is more chashuv. Can't find the word because it's more distinguished. Someone that's more distinguished than it. Shahu gamkin elim, because Atzilus is also a world. It's called the higher world. It's a very distinguished world. It's a very lofty world. It's a very elevated world. But it's still a world that was created, that came from the divine, infinite divine light. I have to reframe it. I didn't say it right. I read it wrong. He's explaining how our world, compared to Atzilus, is as distant as we are from Atzilus. Atzilus is more distant from above. So he explained. Because the higher world, compared to above, is because it's completely, this is a creator, this is a creature. Whereas our nullification compared to Atzilus is only because it's a more distinguished level. But it's still a level. It's still a world. It's more distinguished.
A created world.
Yeah, God is not just more distinguished than Atzilus; it's the source of Atzilus. So in that sense, it's far. Yeah. Okay, that's what he's saying here. So it's only because it's more distinguished, Maila b'Mailo Madrege, in conceptually and in its level, it's much more spiritual, and there's a very great distance between our world and Atzilus. But both of them, at the end of the day, nevertheless, both of them are one level because they're both created and they're both recipients of the divine. And even though the higher world is mashpia be'elam asatachtein, transmits and transmits energy into the lower world, and without this transmission from the higher world, the lower worlds would disappear, God forbid. However, that which the higher worlds transmit to the lower worlds is not their own energy. They're only giving them, it's only giving them the life and energy that it received from the Creator. So Atzilus is not giving life to our world. Atzilus is just transmitting life and energy that it got from above. And therefore, without this transmission, yes, from the higher worlds, the lower worlds would disappear. But it's only a conduit. It's not a source. And also, but it would not have become completely nullified, completely as if it never existed. Because their nullification from the lack of transmission of energy, what would have happened had they not gotten the transmission? They would have been swallowed up or included into the higher world. So how do you do it? It's known that everything that was created in the lower world was first included in the higher world. The kol kelchit detzacham debiyah, all the parts and components of mineral, vegetable, animal, and man in the worlds of biyah, yesh gam ba'atzilus, like it says in Eitz Chaim, which is the book of the Arizal, and explained elsewhere. And the reason is because that too is part of the world. In other words, everything in the Biyah is included in Atzilus in a more subtle spiritual state. So if Atzilus would not have transmitted to Biyah, it wouldn't disappear completely. It would just remain in that amorphous state.
What wouldn't disappear completely? Azilut?
The lower worlds. The lower. He's asking a question. He asked a question. That if you're saying that the lower worlds are not are the distance from the lower worlds to Atzilus is less than the distance from Atzilus to the source. Why? The lower worlds receive their energy from the higher world. The answer is, firstly, they receive the energy. It's not from the higher world; it's from God. That travels through the higher world. And secondly, if it was withdrawn from the lower worlds, what would happen was it would just be included in Atzilus. Those lower worlds would not have disappeared completely. They just would have been like swallowed up in the higher world. In other words, think of it like the concept of love, chesed. Chesed of Atzilus has the concept of love. Love also comes down in lower levels. So that if Atzilus didn't transmit, they wouldn't exist on the lower levels, but you can't say love would disappear. It would just remain on its source. It's equivalent of, let me put it to you this way. Talk about faculties, going back to the painter, yeah? Mm-hmm. If you didn't paint, if the artist didn't paint, so yes, there would be no painting. But you can't say the concept of painting would cease to exist. It just remains in his faculties. It would be like when you're asleep. Your faculties are there. They're just not expressing themselves. So Biyah would not come to manifest because it wouldn't be expressed. But you cannot say that it completely would be nullified. Something of it would remain, its shape and form and its concept would remain within you. Whereas Atzilus, compared to the source, wouldn't be at all there if there was no source. Follow?
Yep.
We're almost done with this chapter, and then we'll conclude, so you have time as well. Okay. And therefore, the bittul of the lower worlds is not that it would completely disappear. It would just be included and remain in the higher worlds and never come down. However, the higher world, you cannot say, you can't say the higher world is kolol, is part of the infinite divine light. Because the divine, infinite divine light doesn't have any midas, does not have any structure, any definitions. And if that energy would cease to be from the source, nothing would remain. You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's like saying like this. The fact that you and I exist, the Creator put us here. The fact that we express our energy is closer to who we are than we are to the divine. That's the bottom line. Even though if you didn't express your energy, the energy wouldn't be there. That the detail, the specific details.
It's like to say on a lower.
So the first thing is God put into place is a shape and form, which is Atzilus. That shape and form compared to the essence is infinitely distant because there's no shape and form in the divine essence. However, the shape and form that comes into Biyah is also distant from Atzilus, but it's closer. But its distance to Atzilus is not as much as the distance of shape and form to no shape and form. You follow what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Think of it like the divine has no shape and form. He manifests in spiritual shape and form. Spiritual shape and form then turns into material shape and form. So the expression goes like this. The distance from the material shape and form to the spiritual shape and form of Atzilus is not as distant, it's more distant, the spiritual shape and form to the source that has no shape and form. Right? Okay, good. And this is the meaning that the higher world, which is in this Atzilus, is infinitely more distant than the distance from the lower world to the higher world. What is the meaning in arech when something has no commonality, has no erech, has no there's no closeness at all.
It's incommensurate.
Right, incommensurate. What does that mean? The in ha'erech, erech means when things are commensurate, it's like one compared to thousands. So even though thousands are far greater than one, but they're commensurate. Like it says in Tanya, why? Because one is still part of 1,000.
Yep.
It's only a small part, but it's still part of it. And you couldn't have 1,000 without 1,000 ones. Okay?
I get it.
Well, Baruchnius, what is that in spirituality? In spiritual terms, it's like when something is a cause and effect. So something causes something else to be, so that the effect is smaller than the cause, but it's still part of the cause. Nevertheless, it's only that nothing's missing from the cause. Like for example, when 1,000 breaks into ones, nothing's missing from the 1,000. But nevertheless, the one is a small part of that 1,000. And the lower level of an effect, the lower level of the cause, mislabeshes, manifests in ba'olol, in the effect, like in saying seichel and midas, in intellect and emotions and thought, speech and action. We're talking here about the power of thought and speech, like he says in a certain manner. Shehin aran, they are nefesh ruach neshama, v'hu inyan biyah, v'chein atzilus, u'k'mei shekosem makamach. They are the three levels of nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is nefesh is spirit. The three names for the three levels of the neshama. Nefesh is the biological, emotional, and intellectual. So I think this is seichel, midas, and machshav dibra ma'aseh. Okay, that seichel is neshama, and midas is ruach, and machshav dibra ma'aseh is nefesh, probably. So, for example, let's take this example. when you contemplate on something, on a certain person, and that arouses within you a feeling of closeness or love to that person. So the love is effect from the contemplation, right?
Yep.
And then you begin to focus on this thought. You begin to speak about it, or you begin to act on it. All those faculties are all cause and effect, right?
Yep.
Something that interests you, so you come and speak to me about it. The speaking is an effect from the interest.
Yep.
So you can't say the speaking is the interest. It's only a small part of it. It's an extension, but it's an extension of it. And it is not infinitely distant. It's like 1 compared to 1,000. Understand? So you have inside of you, let's say, an interest. Then that interest manifests in some type of expression. That expression is one part of the bigger interest. So he says this is in spiritual worlds. These are called that's called the worlds of Bria, Tzir, Asiya, and Atzilus. So that's when you say two things are commensurate to each other. When you say something is not commensurate, it's the opposite. That the small part is not part of the big one. For example, infinity. 1 in 1,000, 1 and the highest trillion are closer than trillion to infinity. Because infinity is not made up of single numbers. That's why you can't add up. Numbers will never add to infinity, and infinity is a completely different set of numbers.
Totally
okay. And then when we say, therefore, going back to what he said, that there's nothing commensurate to you in this world. He's saying that this world, you cannot say that as distant as this world is to the higher world is distant to divine. We can't say that, as I just explained. So now he's adding he's adding an interpretation. You can say it means that in this world is revealed and recognizable how the divine is completely, infinitely distant from us. Because the essential thing of a physical entity, physical piece of matter, is completely not commensurate and infinitely distant from the divine. There's no way that a divine spiritual entity can suddenly become something that's material. Spirituality can be diminished, but as much as you diminish a spiritual entity, it never becomes physical. You know?
Mm-hmm.
You hear?
Yeah.
So let's say you take light, sunlight. You can diminish it. It won't suddenly become an apple. It'll become concealed light. So to create a material thing requires some type of force that's more than just spiritual. Because spiritual does not become material. Spirit and matter don't meet. So when you see a material thing, you're compelled to say that its existence, its creation comes from something that is, like we said before, like a found lost item. Where did it come from? From nowhere.
So God created the spirit also, the spiritual also.
Correct.
We'll talk about matter that. Are down there.
We'll take that. But nevertheless, matter, well, he's adding something, that matter, spirit can still convince itself that it came from something, because you could say, it's some, but matter testifies to the fact that something completely apart from us put us here.
Right.
That's why specifically in this material world, Navin, we can understand. He's adding something beautiful. That is this material world that can teach us that even the spiritual worlds are so not commensurate to divine. That they too are a world. And they too are created like from nothing. So we see from this, we see from this that even Atzilus is also not commensurate, infinitely distant, and even more than we are from Atzilus.
How does the material world teach us that?
You see, because the spiritual world, because it's spiritual, you could say, you know what? God is even more spiritual than me. We're just a diminished
But
state.
but that's 1 in 1,000 to say God is more
Yeah,
spiritual
but
than
the
me.
spiritual doesn't know that. Because we are so distant from spirituality,
Right.
we testify to something that's completely beyond. Atzilus can still deceive itself into thinking that it has a spiritual source, except it's very spiritual, much more than I am. Because the spirituality it could convince itself that God is spiritual. That's the whole point.
But wouldn't the Chokmah, the wisdom, understand?
No, not if there was no. Well, the wisdom understands once it sees this time. This world teaches that element of complete distance. That's what he's adding here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. In other words, because Atzilus is not distant from God, it's godliness. Remember, we spoke about Atzilus as a godly world. So let's put it this way: if you saw two people, one is a tzaddik, and one is a complete evil person, the tzaddik teaches you that God is good. But the evil person tells you that God is completely something else. Because how else could he have created this monster?
Right. Right.
That's the point. So in truth, you're right. Atzilus is more distant, but on its own, that's not obvious because it looks holy. It looks godly. It's the distant things that teach us more about the divine. You understand? Because remember, Atzilus, as we shall learn, it still has the personality of the divine. It just does. He's adding Atzilus on its own. You can convince yourself because its personality is divine. So you could say, you know what, the divine, it's a reflection of the divine. Remember we said it's like imparted from Moses. In truth, it is more distant. But this world is what teaches us that. Let's put it this way. If God had never created a material world and only spiritual, you can convince yourself and say, there is no such thing as God is spiritual. He's just a higher spiritual that came down to lower levels. We wouldn't know that distance. It's only when you see something that's so different you say, then, so 1 second here. Like I mentioned, I think, if the painter only painted farms, okay, you know what? You'd say he's a brilliant farmer. But suddenly he paints a palace. Hey, 1 second. This is something else. That's the...
Yeah.
Okay, that ends chapter 7. I'll read the summary and we can stop here. Here's the summary. And the explanation here, Atzilus is only the revealing of that which is concealed. There's nothing new in Atzilus. That's on one end of it. Nevertheless, Atzilus be'ein Atzilus boyin ein arech l'gaba ma'itza. Atzilus is infinitely distant compared to its source. And more than that, more than the distance, than the infinite distance between Asiyah compared to Atzilus, where there it's only a difference between Elyon and Tacht and something higher, something lower. And even the lower part is also included and encompassed in the higher part. That's why also when the nullification of the lower one is not a complete nullification. It's a nullification from its earlier state. When you say something is not commensurate, infinitely distant, that means it's not even included in any way in its source. And this is when we say that in this world, we recognize that you're completely distant, because in this world we recognize and we can reveal. And from there we learn, we learn from this that all the worlds are that distant, are so distant from the divine. Of course, the next chapter is going to ask the big question. Since Atzilus is only a revelation of the divine and nothing new, so how do we reconcile that with Atzilus being so distant from the divine? I mean, you can speculate the answer, but he's trying to build this whole story up. Anyway, that's chapter 7, page Ayin Beis, page 12, middle of page 12. And then we'll continue. We will continue from chapter 8. We're rolling.
So let me ask you this.
Yes, I'm listening.
Was Azilot and BYA After the cow,
Yeah, of course.
everything was after.
Everything's after the Kav.
Everything in existence.
There's a divine infinite light. Remember, we made the images.
Yeah.
There's the hole, the black hole, the Tzimtzum. Then comes the Kav. The Kav creates all the worlds. And now we're talking about Atzilus and Biyah, that particular. Atzilus is a reflection of divine, it's divine world. Biyah are created worlds. And we're talking, of course, the interface, how do you reconnect them all? So what he explained here is that Atzilus has two elements to it. On one hand, it is, yes, divine, but it's still a world of shape and form, and therefore it's infinitely distant from the divine source of it all.
Is that true of the macro as well as the micro?
It's the same thing in both.
Same thing.
But we talk always on the micro. The macro is a different type of discussion, because there everything is potential state. But it's the same idea.
So then there's the whole reality between the Tzimtzum and the Kav, and what's before them.
Well, whatever we're talking here will play itself out there too, because that's the macro. You know, it all comes down to that in the divine. There's the divine that has no shape and form. There's the divine before the Tzimtzum too that has, as we discussed, spheres, the hidden spheres.
Right.
But that's Atzilus of macro.
Right.
So we're talking now in the micro, but it's a similar concept.
Right. Right. So the divine essence is before the Tzimtzum and before the Kav.
The divine essence is before everything and beyond everything. And it's here now too. You remember, this is not in terms of time. It's all levels.
They talk of the difference between Ayin and Ayin Sof.
Ayin means simply nothingness. Ein Sof means no end. When you say the divine essence, you're talking, it has no end and no beginning. You're talking about the light that says it has a beginning, it has a source, but it has no end.
And that's what certain people call Ein Sof, or?
That's what the Kabbalist Arizal calls Or Ein Sof, which is the infinite divine light. Is usually referred to the divine light before the Tzimtzum.
That's what I'm asking.
But here he's talking also the divine light that is before shape and form, right?
That's easier to get. That Azilut is incommensurate with that level, that world.
Well, he's going to discuss this more. It's going to get more complicated. But right now, establish that because it's a world and it has shape and form, it's that incommensurate, and more incommensurate than the lower worlds that were created compared to the world of Atzilus.
Yes.
As I said, material shape and form is closer to spiritual shape and form than they both are to no shape and form.
No shape and form. Yeah. You can go way down on another level, this idea of evolution. No amount of permutations will create a living human being.
Correct.
There's only another world.
Yeah. And no amount of permutations will create even one drop of matter. In other words, even evolutionary theory all end up, they have one problem. The first bag of gas.
Right.
That they can't answer.
I know.
You know, like the story with Chelam, with the trains. You know, there was a shtetl, they never saw a train before because it was.
Right.
They used to, everything was moved by wagon and horses and cows and animals and donkeys. So one guy goes out to the big city and sees a locomotive. You know, he sees an engine. You know, sees a steam train. So he comes back and says, "Crazy thing! There's this car that just moves. There's no horse pulling it." They said, "How does it move?" He says, "There's another car behind it that pushes it." so they say, "What pushes? How does that push?" He says, "There's a third car." And then there's how many cars? He said, "Well, there's a ninth car, that last car that pushes them all." He says, "And who pushes the last car?" He says, "I forgot to ask that." You know, it's a technicality. You know, so I always found that to be, it's very fine. I have no problem with evolution per se, fine. But then, how does that solve our biggest problem? The first step.
Right.
So someone once told me, he says, "Well, at least we haven't figured out till there."
Right.
I said, "You understand? I don't understand, because don't even till there. Whoever put the first thing there may have just put the rest of it all in motion. I have no problem with that. But you just want to. Right. Why is evolution cut out God? I don't get it at all."
So the Big Bang types, where did whatever bang come from?
Right.
Yeah. They don't go there.
They say, "You listen, we covered what we can cover, and we'll figure that out one day." You know.
Right.
It's like this guy, the last car. Yeah, small little.
That's good.
It's like where the globe sits on the back of a turtle that stands on the top of an elephant that stands on top of another turtle. You know that. So I said, what's the last thing? He says, well, who knows? But at least.
No, this is great. He can't. I mean, he says so many.
You know that one where the Lucy comes home and she asks her father, she asks her mother, where do we come from? Our species, our sister. Mother said, oh, grandma was and grandparents were great Jews in a city in Czechoslovakia. Our great grandparents were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We come from the Garden of Eden. She asks her father. Her father says, well, sit down, embrace yourself. First, we came from apes. Before that, amphibians. Before that, one-celled amoeba.
Right.
So she's so confused. She comes to her mother and says, I don't understand. You give me one answer, Dad gave me another. She said, we're both right. I told you about my side of the family. And I told you about his. So
there's a story of this one guy, this doctor who developed this brilliant stuff. He took over his father's practice. He had these old, it was like a mission, he had these old nuns. And she'd say, well, here's what you have. She'd say, why is that? He'd say, well, it's because this. And she'd give him, well, why is that? Well, the neurology. Why is that? He kept saying, well, he'd give him, so why is that? Finally, he looked at her. As a nun, he said, original sin. She said, oh, I see. It's like a perfect. He said, oh, I see.
They say this philosopher, professor, asked the students at the end of the course, for their doctorate, to answer one question: why? So people wrote pages and pages and pages. And they all got mediocre marks. Two people one got an A, one got an A plus. The one answered why, because, and the second one answered why not?
Why not?
Yeah. Okay, listen, people are not focused. It's just like anything in this world. They focus on the here and now. And
I used to always ask somebody when I was in school and I was saying this stuff, I'd say, look, how you can be nerves and a bunch of molecules. How can a bunch of molecules in the brain create like an emotion like love? How can that be? They couldn't answer. No way. How can a bunch of matter put in a certain order result in feelings? They don't. That's incommensurate. It's another dimension operating through the matter. Science just can't get it.
okay.
So
we did this.
It's good.